The sacred bonds of Nembo. In the remote village of Nembo, where the dense forest whispered ancient secrets and the river flowed like a lifeline through the heart of the land, there stood St. Anthony's Catholic Church. The church was the soul of the village, a place where the people of Nembo gathered not only to pray but also to seek guidance, solace, and hope. At the helm of this sacred institution was Reverend Father Michael, a man whose deep blue eyes seemed to pierce through to one's soul, and whose presence commanded both reverence and trust. Father Michael had come to Nembo 3 years prior, a missionary from far-off lands. The villagers, who had lived for generations steeped in their own customs, were initially wary of this foreign man of God. But Father Michael was patient. He learned their language, respected their ways, and soon, he was not just a spiritual leader but a cherished member of the community. Among his most devoted followers was Adana, the daughter of the village chief. Adana was a vision of beauty, tall, with skin that glowed like the rich soil after rain, and eyes that held the depth of 1,000 stories. She had a quiet strength about her, a woman who carried the weight of her responsibilities with grace. Her life was one of duty, but she found herself drawn to the church more and more, not just for the teachings, but for the man who delivered them. Father Michael noticed Adana's increasing presence at the church. She was always there, organizing the children's choir, helping with the Sunday school, and assisting with the preparations for the various village festivals. They would talk often, their conversations initially focused on the needs of the church and the community. But as time passed, their exchanges grew more personal, more intimate. Adana was fascinated by Father Michael's tales of faraway lands and his unwavering faith. She admired his dedication to the people of Nembo, and slowly, her admiration turned into something deeper, something she couldn't quite name but felt with every beat of her heart. She found herself thinking about him at all hours, longing for their next conversation, their next encounter. Father Michael, too, was not immune to the pull he felt towards Adana. He had taken a vow of celibacy, a vow that he had honored with devotion. But here, in this secluded village, far from the eyes of the church hierarchy, he found himself increasingly distracted by thoughts of Adana. Her laughter, her voice, the way her eyes would light up when she spoke, it all became a constant presence in his mind. The nights grew longer as Father Michael wrestled with these forbidden feelings. He prayed fervently, seeking strength to resist the temptation that gnawed at his resolve. But each time he saw Adana, his heart betrayed him a little more. The struggle within him was like a fire, consuming him slowly, and he knew it was only a matter of time before the flames would engulf them both. It was during the Harmattan season, when the dry winds from the Sahara brought a dusty haze over the village, that the storm between duty and desire finally broke. One evening, after a particularly intense Bible study session, Adana stayed behind to help Father Michael tidy up. The church was empty, the silence between them heavy with unspoken words dot as they walked, their hands brushed against each other, a simple touch that sent shivers down both their spines. They froze, eyes locking, and in that moment, the air between them crackled with an energy neither could deny. It was as if the entire world had narrowed to just the two of them, and the weight of their forbidden emotions became unbearable. Without thinking, Father Michael reached out and gently took Adana's hand in his. She didn't pull away. Instead, she looked up at him, her eyes filled with a mix of fear, longing, and something else, something that mirrored the turmoil in his own heart. "Adana," he whispered, his voice thick with emotion, "I've tried to fight this, but I cannot deny what I feel for you any longer." Adana's heart pounded in her chest as she stepped closer. "Father Michael, I feel the same. But what we are feeling, it's wrong. We know it's wrong." Father Michael cupped her face in his hands, his thumb brushing away a tear that had escaped down her cheek. "Wrong, yes. But sometimes, the heart does not listen to reason." And with that, their lips met in a kiss that sealed their fates. It was a kiss filled with the desperation of two souls who knew they were dancing on the edge of a precipice, yet could not bring themselves to step back. What began as a single, stolen moment quickly spiraled into a whirlwind affair. The sacred vows that Father Michael had taken were forgotten in the heat of their passion, and Adana, who had always been the epitome of virtue in the eyes of the village, found herself swept away by the forbidden love that consumed her. They met in secret, their encounters hidden from the prying eyes of the villagers. The confessional became their rendezvous, a place meant for repentance now tainted by their illicit union. The more they gave in to their desires, the more reckless they became, believing in their own invincibility, their love a flame that burned too brightly to ever be extinguished. But no secret stays hidden forever. The village, with its eyes and ears always attuned to the slightest deviation from the norm, began to sense that something was amiss. Whispers started to circulate, whispers that reached the ears of Adana's father, the chief. He dismissed them at first, unwilling to believe that his daughter, his pride, could be involved in such a scandal. But as the rumors persisted, he could no longer turn a blind eye. One evening, after a village council meeting, the chief confronted Adana. His voice, usually so commanding, trembled with the weight of the accusations he had heard. "Adana, my daughter, is it true what they say? Have you been with the priest? Have you brought this shame upon our family?" Adana, caught between her love for Father Michael and the fear of her father's wrath, could only lower her head in silence. The chief's fury was immediate and uncontrollable. He stormed out of the house, vowing to bring an end to the affair that had tainted his family's honor. The next Sunday, the church was fuller than usual. The entire village seemed to have gathered, drawn by a collective sense of anticipation and dread. Father Michael stood at the altar, his heart heavy with the knowledge that his sins were about to be laid bare. Adana sat among the congregation, her hands trembling as she clutched her rosary, praying for a miracle that she knew would not come. As Father Michael began his sermon, the doors of the church burst open, and the chief, flanked by the village elders, strode in. The murmurs among the congregation ceased, replaced by a tense silence. The chief walked up to the altar, his face a mask of cold fury. "Father Michael," the chief's voice boomed through the church, "you have defiled this sacred place with your sins. You have betrayed our trust, and you have taken advantage of my daughter. You are no longer welcome here." The shock was palpable. Gasps and cries of disbelief filled the air as the villagers struggled to comprehend the magnitude of the scandal that had just been exposed. Father Michael stood frozen, his face drained of color, his heart pounding in his chest. He knew there was no defense, no way to undo what had been done. Adana, tears streaming down her face, stood and made her way to the altar, her legs barely holding her up. "Father, I am to blame too. I was not forced. I loved him, and I still do. But I know that what we did was wrong. I am sorry. I am so sorry." But her confession did nothing to calm the storm. The elders called for an immediate meeting, and it was decided that Father Michael would be excommunicated and sent back to the city in disgrace. Adana, the once revered daughter of the chief, was to be cast out, sent away to live with distant relatives in another village, where she would bear the consequences of her actions away from the watchful eyes of those she had shamed. The day Father Michael left Nembo was heavy with sorrow. The villagers, who had once looked up to him as a beacon of hope and faith, now saw him as a fallen man. He walked through the village, his head bowed in shame, his belongings packed in a single suitcase. The children who used to greet him with smiles and laughter now hid behind their mothers, their eyes wide with confusion and fear. The elders, their faces stern, offered no words of farewell, only the cold, silent judgment of those who had been betrayed. As Father Michael reached the edge of the village, he paused and looked back at St. Anthony's Church, the place where he had once found purpose and peace. A wave of regret washed over him, nearly bringing him to his knees. But he knew there was no going back, no way to undo the damage he had caused. With a final, heavy sigh, he turned and walked away, disappearing into the dusty horizon. Adana's departure was no less painful. Her father, the chief, refused to speak to her, his heart hardened by the shame she had brought upon their family. The villagers whispered and pointed as she passed, their once warm gazes now filled with disdain. Even her closest friends kept their distance, afraid that her disgrace might somehow taint them as well. She left the village in the early hours of the morning, her belongings bundled into a small cloth sack. As she walked away from the only home she had ever known, she couldn't help but glance back, her heart breaking with each step. She knew that this was her punishment, not just for the sin she had committed, but for daring to follow her heart in a world that would never allow such a thing. The years passed slowly for both Adana and Father Michael, each living a life far removed from the other, yet forever connected by the bond they had once shared. Father Michael, now living in a small parish in the city, dedicated himself to his work, trying to atone for his sins through acts of kindness and charity. He never forgot Adana, though, and the memory of their love remained a bittersweet ache in his heart. Adana, living with distant relatives in a village far from Nembo, found solace in healing. She became known as a skilled herbalist, using the knowledge passed down from her mother to help those in need. Though she was respected for her skills, she never remarried, her heart still belonging to the man she could never have. In the quiet moments of the night, she would often find herself thinking of Father Michael, wondering if he ever thought of her too. But despite the pain and regret, both Adana and Father Michael found a measure of peace in their new lives. They had both paid a heavy price for their love, but they had also learned valuable lessons about duty, sacrifice, and forgiveness. They had each walked the path of redemption, and though they could never erase the past, they could at least make amends for the future. Many years later, a much older Father Michael found himself once again standing at the edge of Nembo. He had returned to the village, not as a priest, but as a man seeking closure. He had heard that the village had changed, that the church had been rebuilt and a new priest now led the congregation. But he knew that some things would never change, that the memories of his time in Nembo would always linger in the air like a faint, lingering scent. As he walked through the village, he saw familiar faces, now lined with age, and new faces that looked at him with curiosity. He passed the children playing in the streets, the mothers washing clothes by the river, and the men working in the fields. He even saw the chief, now an old man, sitting under a tree, his face still stern, but his eyes softened by time. Father Michael approached the chief, his heart pounding in his chest. "Chief," he said, his voice trembling, "I have returned to seek your forgiveness. I know that what I did cannot be undone, but I hope that in your heart, you can find it within you to forgive me." The chief looked at Father Michael for a long moment, his expression unreadable. Then, with a deep sigh, he nodded. "Time has a way of healing wounds," he said, his voice low. "We all make mistakes, Father. Some are just harder to forgive than others." Father Michael felt a weight lift from his shoulders, a sense of relief that he had not felt in years. "Thank you," he said, his voice barely a whisper. As he turned to leave, he saw a figure standing at the edge of the village. It was Adana, her once vibrant beauty now softened by age, but her eyes still holding that same depth of wisdom and kindness. She smiled at him, a smile filled with understanding and forgiveness, and Father Michael felt his heart swell with emotion. They walked towards each other, meeting halfway between the village and the river. No words were exchanged, none were needed. They simply stood together, side by side, looking out over the village that had once been their home. In that moment, they both knew that they had finally found the peace they had been searching for. They had come full circle, from love to loss, from betrayal to redemption. And though they could never go back to what they once had, they had found a way to move forward, together.